All right, welcome back to the All In podcast. This week, I am joined by my friend Brynergy. If you don't know why she's called Brynergy, I'm sure you will find out throughout this next hour. Bryn, thank you for coming on, and how's it going?
Oh my gosh, so happy to be here, Natalie. You know I'm a huge fan of yours. So yeah, all in with Natalie. I'm ready.
Awesome. And win with Bryn. I love the analogies. This is I think a perfect first question to dive into is, where does your energy come from?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. And I thought I had good energy until I had Nick Swisher on my podcast. So I think that he takes it up even a level higher, because at the interview, it was like almost like, whoa, like he is on. But my energy comes from something natural. Like I've just been this way my whole life. Once I'm up. I'm like people, I don't drink coffee. I don't do caffeine at all in my life in any capacity other than in chocolate, because it naturally occurs in the cocoa bean. Fun fact. But anyway, I don't eat chocolate every day or every morning, but my point is that it's just natural and it's been there my whole life. Now, do I run out of energy sometimes because I go so hard? Yes. So it can be depleting at times to be on all the time. But I love it. And it helps me as a speaker, as a coach, and to connect with people. So I'm very thankful for that.
Yes. I mean, your energy is contagious, and we met on Clubhouse, and I think it was your energy, and then everyone was calling you Brynergy. And that's how that kind of went on. And that was always awesome. It was always uplifting to have you in those rooms and hear your voice, because that's the thing about Clubhouse. If anyone's listening and you're not familiar, it's audio only. And so even through your voice, you could tell that you're passionate and you had that energy. But you did just talk about how it does somewhat, sometimes run out, and being on all the time can be difficult. For sure. I know after a weekend of competing, I'm so depleted from being on, right? You're trying to impress people around you. You're trying to show up for sponsors. Right. You're trying to compete. So what do you do to recover and replenish so that you can be on again?
It's going to sound like a really boring answer, but I just sleep.
Yeah.
And I call it powered out robot, which is where it's almost like when your phone dies. That's what happens to me. It isn't as if I'm let me go in and recharge. My body's just time to turn off. And so a lot of times I'll go and I'll speak, because I do these all day workshops in schools sometimes. And this is 3 days of being on for 8 hours a day, being in the front of the room. And if you don't know, as a speaker or someone, even as an athlete, what you're talking about, people are drawing on your energy as it's just a thing to be out in the forefront. And so once I get home, sometimes I'll just be sitting on the couch trying to have a conversation with my girlfriend. And then next thing you know, I'm just gone. So that's typically what happens. Sometimes, sadly, even as I'm driving, it's okay, Bryn, wake up. We got to get home. We got to get home, and we got to get home alive. So those type of things. So it's once I'm off, but I do make sure that I get rest. I eat a good diet. I'm vegan, not saying you should be vegan, just eat healthy. And I think I just really try to feed myself a lot of positivity. So, make sure that what I'm consuming elsewhere when I'm not outputting or impacting is also positive and re-energizing. So those are some of the tips. Yeah.
Right. Oh, I love that. That's such great tips. And I think that robot off really related to everything my parents described of me as a child. They were high energy. And then, I would go on, they'd be like, oh, it's time for you to have a nap, or time for you to go to sleep. I'm like, I'm not tired. And 2 minutes later, it's zonk,
it's just gone.
I was pushing through, and then, exactly gone. I wish I could still tap into as much high energy as I did when I was younger. But I think what you touched on with the positive messages, but also the diet too, those things, regardless of how you eat, but just making sure that you are eating foods that fuel you, because that's a big one. When I was an athlete, I was very conscious of everything I ate, especially for performance and inflammation. And I mean, still an athlete for sure, but I haven't been to the same meticulousness of my nutrition as I was. But I'll know, I know I'm okay, if I eat this cookie right now, I have no shame about eating a cookie at all, but I do know that the reaction will mean I might have this spike because it's a chocolate cookie or something, and then I'm going to get that low after. And so I think it is important to at least be cognizant of those things, regardless of if you're eating for performance or whatever, because whether you're an athlete or you're working, managing your energy levels is important, and we're feeding ourselves with food as fuel. And so we want to make sure it's that long-term sustainable fuel.
Absolutely. And when I was an athlete, I definitely did not pay attention to that. I just ate. I took advantage of the youth and just was like, I'm eating whatever I'm eating. And then as I developed more awareness about, even since I'm so into mindset and everything that I consume, I became more conscientious about what I was putting in my body. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, definitely it affects your thoughts and everything, right? Because if you're getting into these highs and lows every day, you're going to hit those low thoughts as well. It won't just be your mood. It'll be everything that you're thinking. If you are feeling negative about something or something, I guess you get like an email, a triggering email or something in that low point, it's going to affect you much differently than the high point.
Agreed. Yeah, it's definitely interesting, the highs and lows of what we go through and being cognizant of what is your high, what is your low, and then how to make sure you're maintaining that balance for yourself and knowing that somebody else's high, like myself, who's an absolute extroverted individual, right? Doesn't mean, I always say, what's your 100%? And it's not what's 100% for me is the same for you. I definitely became sophisticated and more mature about that as I got older. But at one point in my life, I definitely thought, hey, if I'm working this hard, you should be able to do the same thing. And it should look the same. And now I know that that's not the case. So
yeah, that's a good point. I think I've gone through the same process where it's like you want to hold other people to the same standard, but you forget that everybody is completely different.
Absolutely.
And so recognizing, I think that like effort is effort. And so, if I'm putting in all my effort and so you just trust that someone else is putting in all their effort, the results might look very different and that might serve each individual person in a different way.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I heard you talk before about like the concept of, for example, when you're speaking and you're going out and giving that high energy to people, but also you talked about receiving and being able to receive it back. Could you dive into that concept?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people we're really good as people that, especially in the helping space. So like if you're working, I work in the mental performance, mental skills, whatever you want to call it. I don't care the title, but I help athletes basically harness the best of their mindset to have better performances and just be better people overall, because I care about the whole person, not just the athlete. Yeah. And with that, because I'm constantly impacting, serving, thinking of how I can inspire and whatnot, when someone comes and then gives it to me, it feels weird. It's an interesting thing. So when you're someone that's always giving, especially people in the service industry, you find this a lot with doctors, nurses, teachers, educators, anyone in these fields where it's just like it's all about service, they have a hard time receiving. And so when we're talking about mental health, it's so important to make sure that we are on the receiving end, because it's all a cycle. When it comes to my energy, learning how to give and receive energy, because it's not just about like, I'm all in, which is awesome, but all in for yourself means also sometimes holding the space to allow to receive and be in a place where you can receive, because you can't give from an empty cup. And that is something that we see all the time from professionals, like you burn out and now you're not there as that source and that support for that person. So being able to receive is such a key part of being a giver as well.
Love that. And so well said. And speaking about the topic of mental health, I want to touch on something that's super current to this week that we're recording, which is the whole thing with Naomi Osaka. So
yes.
I'm a big fan of Naomi, and I know you posted about it with the same thoughts. And so I'll give the listeners a bit of a background. Chances are, if you have been a listener of this podcast, you probably know about Naomi Osaka because you probably follow some similar wavelengths and channels and platforms and all those good things. But if you don't, Naomi Osaka is like an up and coming I wouldn't say up and coming. She's already at the top of the
I think she's number one right now.
Yeah. But she's young, right? Like she's young.
She is young though. Right. Yes. She is still in the early starts of her career. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And so she's young. She's at the top. She's actually the highest paid female athlete. I know last year she was the highest paid at 30 some million. Over this past year, now she's like 50 some million, which is just incredible. Really breaking ground for female athletes in so many respects. But she's dealt with her fair share of mental health issues, and she spoke out about it this week when she was going into the Roland Garros tennis tournament. and she shared on social media that she was not going to be participating in any media post-game and press because she wanted to protect her mental health. She's been dealing with some things and wanted to just, focus on the game. Now that caused a lot of outrage because there is a process where you get fined if you're not participating in these things. There was kind of, shots called at the Tennis Federation for not protecting their athletes' mental health. But then there was just so many negative comments about people saying, this is your job. You're paid all this much. You should just suck it up, just kind of dismissing the mental health and just saying, you've got to push through and do this, to the point where then some people were saying she was doing it just for the attention or whatever, which is just so, I can't wait to talk about this because it just boiled my blood. But then she came to the point where she pulled out of the tournament to not cause attention, just to, try to back off, which of course it kind of did cause more attention because then the media focused entirely on that rather than, the rest of the players or what's going on. But I think it's also empowering a lot of athletes to step up and speak about their mental health. And she went as far as talking about the depression that she goes through and how she's very introverted. And so it takes a lot of energy for her to go and talk to the press. The press sometimes aren't the kindest people. We've seen it a lot in sports, how they try to get specific emotional triggers and reactions. So I would love your first thoughts, and then I'm sure we can jam out about the topic in general.
Yeah. So many thoughts. I'm afraid that I would keep talking if I went into this because I did a 16-minute live yesterday. I'm not going to go 16 minutes, but I was very I was fired up about this. So first and foremost, Naomi Osaka is a high-profile athlete. And you and I know Natalie's coming from the world of being a high-profile athlete and being an individual sport. Even though you are part of a team, when you are competing, it is just you out there. And so whereas Naomi Osaka is just competing on that court by herself. She may represent a country, she may represent a brand, but she is on that court representing Naomi Osaka first and foremost. And so I think it's very interesting in the world of sports and the world of, media and social media that people feel that they have the right to comment on someone else's mental health. I want to make that clear. That if I tell you what I need for my mental health, you have no say in the matter. Now, if you are a psychologist or a psychiatrist that I am working with, and you want to provide some sort of diagnosis, prognosis, treatment plan, that's different, that I have contracted and I have decided to work with. But in general, and even then, but anyway, the point is that it's important that we give people what they need. The fact that she had to come out and say what she was struggling with for people to take it seriously is one of my biggest pet peeves about the situation. And then people talking about her doing things for attention. Anyway, I could go on and on and on. But I want to make sure that I give us the right to kind of have a conversation about this. But there is the racial aspect of her being a Black female, also Asian. There's so much for the holistic of who Naomi Osaka is and what she does as a sports figure to use her platform for advocacy, for raising social issues. And what she said in that first statement was the most powerful, which was, I don't understand this culture of kicking people while they're down. Right. It doesn't make sense to me. And so to me, that was that's everything. We need to look at that because we love to put our sports figures on pedestals and then we love to knock them down because for some reason, because we're not them, we don't, we revel in both sides. And I want us to live in a world where we celebrate people and we accept and have compassion and empathy for them.
Yes. Oh, so many different points that
yes.
You brought up, but also that obviously going on and factors going on in this. I think, there's obviously the mental health stigma. There's the media aspect of things. There's people who are saying, she's seeking attention or whatever it is. There is, like you said, the racial aspects. There is also, the individual sport versus team sport athlete. Right. There's the culture as a whole. There's just so many moving pieces that just need to be addressed. And I'm glad that it's sparking conversation and getting addressed. Right.
Yes.
Yes. I know when it first came out, I was I see things from one side because like you said at the start of this podcast, you want to get positive content, positive information. So I follow a lot of accounts that support women in sport and support diversity, support equality, support mental health. So everything I'm seeing is like an echo chamber, right?
Right.
I went onto Facebook and somehow it came into my feed, a bunch of like random, I don't follow like tennis Facebook pages, but like tennis Facebook pages posting articles. So I was like, let me see what people are commenting. Like usually I don't do that because it's bad for my mental health, but I speak a lot about athlete mental health. So I want to dive in and see what's happening. The comments were just so heartbreaking, especially as someone who's gone through anxiety and depression. I was like, wow, people don't understand still. And I thought people were, I thought we were getting to this different point, but it was just seeing that other side of things that I usually don't see. It was just so disheartening.
There's such a lack of empathy because, as you started to say about Naomi Osaka, she is one of the highest, if not the highest, woman in sports paid individual in existence at this time. Yep. And the higher the pay that athlete gets, and then also putting in the factor that she is a woman of color and she's a woman, those, all of those are like, they're supposed to be just descriptors, but they become, unfortunately, like slights against the individual because, different things. But the point is that because she gets paid so much, the little guy, and I'm not making us little, but those of us that have never earned anywhere near that echelon of, compensation, it becomes like, look, this is what you get paid for. Like, go sit down somewhere. And what are you talking about mental health? Like, you're being ridiculous. And, you don't want to talk to the press because, they might say something mean to you. Like, oh, poor you. Like, but you spoke about something when you introduced this subject and you said, you said something about it's your job. Interestingly enough, I have a job. You have a job. Mm-hmm. We've all made mistakes. I made a mistake probably today that I'm not aware of yet that hasn't come back. But unfortunately, my mistakes are not going to be broadcast on CNN or ESPN or on some sort of loop constantly reminding me and replaying that mistake over and over and over again. And even if I do make the mistake, no one's going to shove a microphone in my face immediately after it happens. It goes, so what are you thinking? Like, how are you feeling about that big mess up that you did that caused this, right? And so I just think that it's really easy to sit behind a computer or in front of a camera or anything and speak about something that you have no firsthand experience about. And so I'm not making them wrong. I understand why they feel the way they feel. And like they just play a game, but I don't think you're really factoring in what it is to be on everybody's topic of conversation, television channel, video replays. And someone said something in a Clubhouse room yesterday that I want to speak to this. Her name was Vanessa, and she was a retired WNBA player. And it was something that, even though I work with athletes, I have always said, next play speed, and you know what that means, which is just move on to the next thing. So if you make a mistake, as Natalie's a snowboarder, and it's just like, okay, next run, next whatever. But the thing is that when you're in the Olympics or you're on the top tier of athletics, there's a video of that mistake, and the whole world is watching you make that mistake, and then they're going to replay it. And so it's like, how do we train the athlete to move on to the next play when the world is reminding you over and over and over of that mistake? And so I was like, that was just, I don't know why it was so epiphanous for me, because it should be something that was obvious, but I didn't really consider it. And I think it's because, even though I work with some professional athletes, I mean, they've talked about it, but it's like, wow, the gravity of that and just kind of putting yourself in their shoes, I think is so important.
Right. Like you have a lot of people who say, I'm scared to go out and start a business or whatever. And it's like, who is actually going to watch you fail? They're scared of, putting themselves out there. I was like, your mom, your dad, and your girlfriend, right? But like when it comes to sports, you have millions of people who are watching you. You have sponsors, everything relies on that performance. And so I think people don't really understand that. And you spoke about the monetary aspect. And what I think is interesting is like the studies have shown us that past, I think it's like 100 some, that like I know it's past 75,000, the degree of like life satisfaction and happiness with money, it starts to diminish. And then it's past, I think 100 something where it starts going down. Like the more money you have, it goes down. Right. And we're talking about, she's so young, she's got this money so quickly. People seem to still correlate. So that's like also the world's view on success is still so skewed because we think money equals happiness, and it's not true. And like, not to say I had money when I was at the top of the snowboard game. I didn't. I was trying to make the Olympics. That's, it's not a high paid endeavor in that sense. But people still thought, oh, you're living this dream. You're traveling around the world, snowboarding and doing this. And that's what prevented me from ever speaking about my mental health. And it made me feel guilty to the point every morning I'd wake up and be like, I just want to be at home, not here. And then I would beat myself up. Like, no, that's so wrong for me to think about that, because everyone says I'm living the dream. This was my dream when I was 13. Like, it's so wrong for me to be depressed when I'm living this dream life. Right. And so I think that narrative is totally wrong. And then to what you said of, just people watching, people replaying. It's so interesting that it is true, that narrative of when you're at the top, people want to drag you down. And it's like, when I watch F1, I love Lewis Hamilton as a person, everything he stands for, the activism, but it's very easy to root against him. Like, I cheer for Red Bull because I'm like, Lewis has won everything. I just want to see some drama in the race. Right. So it's human nature to seek drama, but I wish we would just see it in performances, right? Like, we can cheer for different teams.
I don't know. Yeah. I'm sorry. I know I'm interrupting. I don't know if it is that we want drama. I think it's just something about, we love an underdog. We don't like the same person to win all the time because we want to believe that it's possible for us to win because we identify with that underdog. And although some of us have been, even in sports, that undefeated person, we, once we become not that person, it's like, Floyd Mayweather, he wins all of his fights. They're boring. He plays a defensive fighter. He's a smart boxer, but it's like, I just want somebody to knock him out. And I'm like, why, Bryn? Why are you rooting against this master, a precision boxer, And so then it just becomes like, you have to check yourself. Like, what is it that makes you hunger? And I mean, I'm not saying that we don't love drama. I just want to add that. I just think people just really want to believe through everything comes back to us. And so they just want to believe that the underdog wins sometimes, and that it can't always be the powerhouse, whatever that is at the time.
Right. You want to see yourself in someone else. And most of us aren't in the position of like, we're the top dog for so long in our past. So exactly their storylines. That makes a lot of sense. I get into a lot of funny arguments with my boyfriend about it because we watch all these different sports and he never cheers for the person on top. And then he always has like a chip on his shoulder about them. Like whether it's CrossFit, F1, he's like, all his friends, they don't like Lewis Hamilton. They're like, no. And I'm like, and they make fun of me because I like him, but I'm like, well, I'm actually cheering for Team Red Bull, but I still really respect and like Lewis. And then same in CrossFit. I'm like, I cheer for the person who's won 5 times or 4 times in a row. But I'm like, because I've spent so much time talking to other athletes and just with my own path that I know the mindset and what they go through in their mental health and their mindset to stay on top, because they have to deal with these people rooting against them. They have to deal with all these things. And so for me, it's harder for you to like stay at that level for so long than to be that person coming up.
And it was something else that you said earlier, which was, like, when we talk about the compensation of Naomi Osaka, it is a byproduct of her being the best in the world. It is not why she plays tennis. I want to be clear about that. Like, I'm not saying that she's not enjoying the perks and it may have changed her entire family's legacy and things like that, but she didn't get into tennis because she heard that they get paid a lot. She's wanted to be good at a game she loved. And unfortunately, what happens, and you kind of understand this when you work with athletes and you get more into the higher levels of the sport, that enjoyment goes down as the stakes get higher because it becomes more about the precision, the winning, like I have an NBA athlete that I work with, and he was saying like, they can talk bad about you for weeks on weeks on weeks. You can have a good game or a good string of games, but they don't report back on that. They don't go back and go, oh, things have turned around. They're back or whatever. It's just like the media like uses whatever is going to sell advertising and marketing at the time. And so there's not a lot of care and concern about the person in the uniform. And so when an athlete like Naomi comes out and says, yo, this is what I need. And then willing to pay the fine, because if it's in her contract, which I don't know anything about how that all works, But I think what I was most sad about in that situation was, of course, not this, the tennis federation not supporting her and those things, but other athletes actually coming out and kind of being like, yeah, and I know some people are just speaking to their own experience, and I'm happy about that. I just want there to also be a statement that says, but I support, whatever an athlete says that they need for their mental health. Like, Billie Jean King's like, yeah, the press is part of your job, but it's like, yeah, but during your era, you hid your sexuality for some portion of the world. Yeah. And then you came out and were this advocate, but there was a cost to you at that. And I think speaking to that and being able to speak to your own challenges with mental health is that time to join with that athlete and not to criticize their way of going about it. Yeah, maybe it's because she's not mature enough. Maybe it's she's not battle tested enough. You can make all these arguments. It doesn't matter. She asked for it. She needed it. And it was our job to give it to her.
Yes, that's so well put. And I think like when you go back to like Billie Jean King's era, when I was looking at some of the comments, there was a few positive ones on those tennis Facebook posts. And it was someone who explained, I didn't know this was the case, that before in tennis, you used to have like the time to go shower, eat, all these things, and then come back and do press. But now it's immediately after. When you think of how grueling in the sun playing for that long, like I know when I do any sort of sport, my mind is not there. And so if you're already dealing with like depression and different things, oh my gosh, like on a good day, I'm moody and when I need to eat and drink and hydrate after training, right? So, or after a competition. So it's just so crazy to put them under that stress where especially they'd be so worried about saying the wrong thing. Like I would say things in workouts or right after a workout that I would never say normally, right? And so you're so cautious about saying the wrong thing because you could lose a sponsor and there goes half your income.
That's so important. Like you understand that they're right. They have to represent themselves, but they don't get to represent themselves. They have to represent a version of themselves that keeps everything kosher and keeps us loving them. And so it's that thing of like, and being an introvert and not being, like she said, a natural born speaker. It's this feeling that I don't know what I can say in this moment. And then by the reporter putting that question, maybe I wasn't even thinking about that, but now you got me thinking about that. And, when she says they put doubt in you, and yeah, I mean, nobody can put doubt in your mind, but yeah, people talking to you and you're in a vulnerable state, tired, exhausted, defeated after your loss. That's not the best time to be facing some sort of, battle of like a bunch of people and a barrage of questions that are aimed at like, hey, so how does it feel to lose? I don't know. How does it feel to lose? I mean, I've never seen a loser that's like, yes, this is amazing. You know what? I got through the second set better than I thought I would, and maybe that is the victory after processing the loss, but I don't think that comes immediately after. And seeing people cry, and even watching the women's national championship, I don't know if you watched theirs, but, they're like crying, trying to keep their composure. Serena Williams has walked out of a press conference because she could not keep it together. And LeBron James has gotten upset and walked out of a press conference. So it's happening all the time. And so I think, and I know you want to maybe not just talk about Naomi Osaka, but I think in general, it's just maybe some sensitivity training for the press and asking like, what is the benefit? I understand you have to sell publications. I understand that there's pressure to get the best thing, but I think there's also something to be like, to be an advocate for the athlete and still be able to report the story and just say, like, what's a question you could ask after a competition? If you're going to still have to do it immediately after, that doesn't totally debilitate or I don't know, devastate their confidence. So.
Right. Yeah. And it could just not be the individual journalist, right? Like she said, that there's some great journalists, but it's just the culture as a whole, and they have a job to do and they're pressured to get a certain outcome. And so it's just unfortunate. Before we move on to another topic, I just want to talk quickly about just the whole underlying message that I saw from the press, from those negative comments, was that people still don't see mental health just as health. Like I know I shared something on my story that someone posted, which was really well said about talking about, you have the flu, so you can't do some parts of the job, and like looking at it in that comparison. I actually earlier yesterday, I was having a conversation and making that exact same, where someone was like kind of skeptical. We're saying like, it is part of the job though. So like it makes sense. It doesn't make sense that she should get kicked out or anything, but like she would get fined. And so, she's paying that cost to protect her self-care, which for her is, not too much money compared to what she makes. And so I said, that is true. But think about the fact, like in the world, we need to change this culture and this belief, because for example, if I I go to work, say I work a 9 to 5, and I've broken my right writing arm, let's say, or my wrist, and I tell them, hey, like I've broken my wrist, so I can't really do the writing that I need to do, but they're not going to say, oh, you don't do your job in whole. They'll say maybe, okay, we can do some of the typing. So for Naomi, maybe she still wants to play the tennis. She's going through depression, but tennis is probably her outlet, right? Like a lot of us as athletes, or the sport is our outlet. It's dealing with those other side things. So she's like, I can't really handle this part of my job right now, but I'm going to focus on doing the best in this part. And usually, it should be okay. That's fine. But because it's something mental and people can't see, people still don't understand it. And there's still that stigma. So we're not quite there yet with that mental health is just health, which is, I thought we were a little bit further, and it's so unfortunate.
Well, I think that's just the best part about what you said was that it's Val Whiting was on my podcast. She played in the WNBA, and she calls it an invisible injury. Like she was unable at times to go into the game because she was struggling with depression, and she was a starter. And so the coach was trying to put her in, and she was like, not. And this is a game that she loved. Yeah. And so similarly, we need to be compassionate to know that. And like you said, the health part. Okay. When someone says, this is what I need for my mental health, like, yes, Naomi had to come out and say, she didn't have to, but she felt she had to because people were getting on her. Like, I've struggled with depression. And so if you're just having a bad day at the tennis court, like, that's not the same. And I'm like, whoa, nobody gets to tell. Like, I've already spoke about that. Yeah. But in essence, it was just this idea that even if she didn't ever struggle with depression, anxiety, any of these buzzwords and diagnoses or labels, as we like to put on people, the end of the day is if I'm advocating for something I need for mental health so that it does not turn into a diagnosis or a condition or a chronic whatever, then that is what it is. I need this because it's taking its toll on me, and I don't want it to turn into a thing. And so I think that's interesting. And so I was just in a Clubhouse room prior to this. So they were talking about that. And Clubhouse is the audio app we already talked about. That's where we kind of connected. We did connect. But the point is that it is about it's just health. And when we talk about what she was being fined, healthcare is one of the biggest costs of your life. And so you either pay it up front or you pay for it down the road, right? If I don't eat the right diet, if I don't take the right vitamins or, take care of my body, it's going to fall apart on me. And then I'm going to be paying out the nose for healthcare. So even though people say, like you said, she's making a ton of money, but comparison to what she was going to be fined, which would have been about $250,000 if she was fined $15,000 a day throughout the 2 weeks of the French Open is what it came out to be. But if you think $250,000 on her mental health compared to, right, what the cost of not having her mental health, not being able to make 50 million anymore, not being able to be in that area, that is a small price to pay. And then when you put it in context, when you scale down a map, right, to where you're at, would you pay that if it meant the difference between, one or the other? So I think that once we can put ourselves in her shoes and look at it from that perspective, and also realize that someone does not have to be bleeding for us to have compassion. Someone does not have to be, have a visible injury. We just need to say, if someone says, yo, I'm having trouble, we take it seriously. I don't know if you know this, but I'm a mandated reporter in the school district, and not that part. I know you don't know that, but the part about if a child says anything like suicide ideation, we don't go, I don't know, probably not serious. This kid, we explore it, we investigate it.
Yeah.
Not investigate but we ask questions, and there's this protocol you go through because you just don't know. And so we need to have that same level of and not saying that suicide and mental health, again, I'm not trying to couple it with mental illness or, something severe. But I just want people to get that we just need to take it seriously. Someone says it, I'm going to take it seriously until something comes along that would have us be able to clinically, not clinically, but I don't know the word I'm looking for, but definitively say, you know what, this isn't that. So,
yeah, no, totally agree. And I think a great tip out there, if from what you just said, if anyone is listening and they're struggling as an athlete or whatever, is, if you can, to advocate for yourself and to also look at things in the big picture rather than trying to push through, even if you're at the height of your career or you're starting a new business or whatever it is. think about the longevity that you want to have in your life and going back to being someone who's happy-go-lucky and ecstatic and optimistic for the future.
Yeah.
Think about, if you need to take the days off, if you need to take the year off, if you need to make a big transition, like I think we need to normalize making decisions based off our mental health.
Yes.
Because it is very important. And like anyone else, you have an injury and oh, I can't get another concussion, or I can't, tear my knee again, or because then I'll never be able to walk. I think it's very similar. It's like, no, you need to, take that step back to deal with your mental health, because you don't want it to go to the point where you might not be able to come back from, or it will take a lot longer to come back from.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So yeah, that was great to chat about Naomi Osaka. I knew you'd have a lot of thoughts. I knew we booked this before that even happened.
Yeah.
But I was glad that we were able to touch on it. I think it's just so important and so relevant with everything going on right now. And we talk a lot about mental health on this podcast, but now I want to shift into, talking about mental performance.
Yes.
So what got you into the whole realm of mental performance before we go into maybe some tips and different things?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I am a former D1 athlete, and I was not into the mental game at all. I ran track. I just knew how to go fast. When the gun goes off, do what you're supposed to do. I was varsity all through high school, had all these medals. Then I went to college. I was definitely a very, very small fish in a big pond at Michigan State, but I was able to walk on, which I'm proud of now with some context, because I kept thinking like, what? I mean, it just happened. It's what I wanted to do. But I realize now that it takes a lot to walk on to a Division I, school and all that. And so, but I didn't really get into mindset until I was post sports career. And I really just kind of, I was complaining, like the hard workouts. And I think all athletes go through that, but I just didn't realize like what my mindset. So I think often what I could have been had I had the things I know now when I was running, because I only knew how to do what I was good at and do what my coaches told me to do. And so I got into mindset in general. And then I was always using sports analogies because I've always loved, athletics and sports, even if I didn't participate in all of them, because I ran back. I did basketball for a few years and ran track. Those were my two sports, but track was the one that took me all the way. But ultimately, I just started with basketball, which was my favorite sport, and started with a team. Once I decided that I was like, maybe I should work with athletes. And then, just being able to apply what I was already doing as a motivational speaker and giving all this stuff and bringing that, all of the studies of all the things I've read about mindset and applying it to the performance aspect. And so just sort of marrying my two loves of mindset and sports. And that's how I got into it.
I love it. So I want to talk about like, what are some of the daily habits or daily actions that you see overall when it comes to high performers in general?
So a big thing is self-awareness. I start everywhere with my athletes with awareness. Of course, it's easy to say that if you're in that space, but it's like, if you're listening to this right now, just what are you aware of? And most people will say, I'm aware that I'm listening to a podcast, or I'm aware, like right now I'm I'm talking to Natalie on a computer and stuff, but there's so many different levels of awareness. So we can go external and think about all that, but then there's the fact that what's the temperature like in the room that you're in? What does it feel like to be in the chair that you're in? And then what's going on internally in your body, emotionally? Are you aware of your heart beating? Are you aware? And so self-awareness on that level, just on the physical, and going all the way on the different levels, and then the emotional. And then there's going into the psychological. What are what are you aware of yourself? Like, what are your habits? What are your patterns? Because the first step to any change is awareness. And if I'm not aware of it, I can't change it. I know I need to change something, but I don't know what to change. People say, like, they like to use words like, especially in our space, and this, Natalie, focus, concentrate, consistency. They're just words, and but nobody teaches you how to be consistent. Nobody teaches you how to focus. And so that's what I'm really talking about, is like, let's talk about awareness. How can we become aware? And then once we figure out what's going on, what adjustments do we need to make to get it to the level that we want, so that we can then affect our performance?
Yeah. So I love that you brought up consistency, because I think it's something that almost every athlete that's been on here talks about, is like consistency is the most important over even like intensity, right? Is just showing up and being consistent. So let's dive into that. How can someone who's listening become more consistent?
Well, here's the thing. I did a post about this not too long ago. You're all consistent. So it's not about being consistent. You're consistent. The question is, what are you consistent in?
Yes.
So every day I get up and I get up around the same time. I do the same habits. So I'm being consistent. But we're talking about being intentionally consistent towards a goal, a task, or an objective, okay, or an outcome. So a lot of times, sometimes we're too focused on the outcome or the goal and not focused on the process. All right. So the first thing is sometimes starting with the goal and working backwards. So here's where I want to be in a year. So what's that going to look like? Where do I need to be at the 6-month mark? Where do I need to be at the 3-month mark? Where do I need to be at the 1-week mark? Where do I need to be at the tomorrow mark? Okay. And then talk about what are the habits and the patterns or the behaviors that I'm going to need to put into place to accomplish each one of those benchmarks along the way. Because the key is to bite size it, by the way, because I ran a marathon a long time ago and I had an end goal, but I did not have a 1-mile marker. I did not have a 5-mile and so on and so forth. And I didn't accomplish my goal for more than one reason, but that was one of them, because mentally to run for 4 hours and 20 minutes without any sort of victory or celebration along the way is tough. And that's what we're talking, this younger generation, this microwave society. So we're talking about being consistent. 1, you got to bite size your goals. Okay. 2, you got to become aware of what are you being consistent in, and is that moving you towards or away from your goal? And then now add intention to it, sprinkle a little intention in the recipe. And where do you want to intentionally readjust and refocus and pivot towards the objective that's at hand? And so that comes with sometimes changing not just your habits and patterns, but starting with your identity. Who do I want to be in that process, or who do I need to be in that process? So part of it is, if I'm really attached to this identity that I'm a procrastinator, that's probably not going to serve me in this journey. So maybe just changing, and you read Atomic Habits, the identity that I spring from, that's going to make quite a difference on the journey. Like, you know what? I'm a person who gets things done. I'm a person who's consistently putting hard work and effort into everything I do. I'm consistently visualizing. So that would be my answer to that question.
Well, I love that reframe of intentionally consistent, because it's true, right? If you say, I want to wake up every day at 6 a.m. And you're like, I just can't be consistent with it. Well, you're consistently sleeping in. So, so that you're being consistent with something. So thinking about, okay, what is that habit that you want to change? And is that serving the goal that you have? Because chances are your goal isn't wake up at 6 a.m. It's wake up at 6 a.m. because I will get more done towards my goal of doing X, or I know that's what I need to do because it improves my energy. I see the sunlight, the morning light, like whatever that is.
Right. Yeah. And I want to add, sorry, you did a good parallel to what I was saying, or drew a nice line for me that I just want to emphasize. The goal pulls you, right? Like you said, if you just have I just want to be consistent in waking up early. Why? And they talk about, Simon Sinek talks, he's famously quoted for what's your why. He's not the first person to ever talk about it, but he's the guy now. But it's this idea that that's why that big goal is there. But the bite-sized goal along the way is what kind of keeps it. But that goal should pull you and propel you to say, I get up at 4:30 in the morning. Do I love when my alarm goes off at 4:30? Absolutely not. But I get up because I am committed. So committed is also a part of the consistency to becoming the person that gets things done. And I've seen my productivity when I get up at 4:30 versus during the pandemic, at times I was getting up at 9, 10 o'clock. So.
Right. And that's the thing, right? Like you can go online and you can see every guru say, wake up at this time, eat this, sleep this long, do this, but it's going to be different for everybody. And I think it's important that people recognize that even the tips that athletes, coaches, the amazing people who come on this podcast share, that those tips, they're sharing what's best for them. And it leads them to their goals. It might not be what's best for you.
Exactly.
For example, I used to, now I wake up pretty early because I'm managing a business and still training and trying to do a lot in my day. But when I was only training as an athlete, I remember talking to my coach and I said, everyone says I should wake up at like 5 a.m. Should I be doing it? He's like, no. And I was like, well, why? Like, am I supposed to be someone who's like hard worker and wakes up early? Right. He's like, you need more sleep because you're training like 8 hours a day. So you don't have to be up to train before your work because you're literally just training. So what is that habit going to serve you? It's only going to decrease the amount of sleep you can have, change up your schedule that doesn't need to be messed up. And so just recognizing some of these things. So for anyone listening, like check in with your own schedule and check in with your own goals, and don't just adopt someone else's habits that serve their goals. Make your own habits serve your own goals.
Absolutely. Could not agree more.
So I want to dive into something you posted about recently, which is the concept of a mental diet. Could you walk through that and what it means?
Yes. So we're all, there's enough talk out there about what you put in your body when it comes through your mouth, right? So when it comes to food, dieting, even the word diet has its own connotation, and I'm not supporting dieting or not dieting. But when I wanted to post about this because I'm very cognizant, and this is why I went vegan, not because I care about animals, which I do, or anything like that, but it's like I became aware of my own mental diet. So if you look at the way animals are treated in our country or in our agriculture, there's not a lot of quality of life. There's a lot of fear in that process, and then we're consuming that fear because the animal's killed in fear, and then that's in our food. We're already, and I'm not, again, advocating for veganism because like Natalie just so eloquently said, find what's right for you. But I'm telling you what my journey was. Yeah. And so in that process, when we talk about a mental diet, I just became aware of like, wait, I'm having enough challenge, like, auditing and, correcting what's going on upstairs. I don't need any help in the department of what I put in my mouth via my food. So then it became, okay, well, what kind of movies do you watch? A lot of killing, a lot of murder. Fun fact, your brain does not know the difference between a murder on the screen and a murder in real life because you're attached to that character. You're going on the journey. The movie takes you and transports you if it's good and you're into it. And so in that moment, you have some sort of attachment to that character. You've cried after a movie, you've wept, or you've gotten excited about them killing somebody, but we've become desensitized to that violence, and so is there a lot of killing and gore in the movies you watch? Okay. Or the quality of what's the music talking about? A lot of like, if you're listening to certain types of music that preach a lot of sad messages. And so like, a lot of love songs, all by myself, right? I'm alone. It's all these messages that are reinforcing some of our limiting beliefs, some of our fears, and, solidifying them inside of us. And I'm not saying that I don't love those songs or that music, but when I talk about a mental diet, I'm saying, look at everything that you're consuming on a daily basis. I don't watch the news, by the way. Like the news is nothing but to keep you watching. So if they lead with somebody got killed, hey, somebody robbed somebody, this happened. Here's the fun fact about the news. And more people made it home safely yesterday than people who didn't. But that doesn't sell advertising. Right. So if like more times banks don't get robbed than they do, more people, actually drive safely in cars than don't. And so, but that is not, no, we don't have time to have cameras on all of the good stuff that's happening. And this is why people love, like you said, they're attracted to that could happen to me. Oh, okay, good. Now that I know that danger is out there, I'll be safer. Right. But it's almost like now we're saying danger is around every corner. Right. So it's this idea of like being cognizant, like, why am I watching the news? First thing in the morning, turning on the news, reading the newspaper, your brain is just waking up and you're giving yourself this. Emotionally, who are you around? Okay. Do you need to be around certain people? Audit your circle. Are you around a bunch of blamers, complainers, and negative Nancys, or negative Nathans? Because I don't want to just make it seem like women are negative, but or negative by non-binary people. But the point is that whatever it is, just consider, going on a mental diet. So look at everywhere you're consuming things through your eyes, ears, mouth, and senses and all of that. And then once you've done that, I think in general, just becoming more positive will start to make that shift automatically. And then that'll help you with, and then we can talk about kind of lasering in other areas.
I think that the concept of the mental diet is just so important because I think our environment is everything. And some people, especially people who score very high on empathy and like adaptability, environment really matters a lot. Like what you said, like it's kind of a joke. I saw some TikToks about it the other day. People were all relating to, they're like, oh, ready to go to the movie theater so I can take on the character's personality for the next 2 weeks. And I said, oh my gosh, that's so funny, because I remember when I was kind of feeling low, I was watching like Vampire Diaries, and I started putting myself in the sense of like being in this conflict between like loving this person and then this, and like, you just take on those people and then dealing with these heavy decisions of like being a vampire. I don't know, like just crazy stuff. This is when I was a teen. And I'm like, that actually probably wasn't the best way to pull me out of not feeling so good. Right. Like if I watch something with a more positive message rather than taking on these characters' emotional trauma on top of my own, it just doesn't make sense. And sometimes like, it is kind of the fun part about life. And that's what makes TV shows and movies fun, is you can kind of almost role play and pretend to be somebody else and go into these fictional scenarios that you never would in real life. But I don't think it's conducive to, we just have to be aware of it in our everyday life and how it will affect us. Like I said, with the cookie, like no shame in eating the cookie, right? But I know how it's going to make me feel. And so I'm at least aware of those things. And
we're not talking about a one-off, right? Like you watch that movie and now like hardly anything I watch has any blood, guts, and gore. But now when I watch it, I'm still aware of how that affects me. But like if you're watching romantic comedy after romantic comedy, or you're watching all of these shows where the only way they sell that show to keep watching is to keep having these couples sort of come together and then break up, come together and break up. So what is that teaching you about love, teaching you about relationship? And so it's reinforcing messages in our mind. And then we go, but it doesn't affect me. But yet I believe that relationships don't work out because that's what I see reflected to me everywhere. And now that's what I'm looking for, is relationships that don't work out, because the reticular activating system, we all know, the more that once we become aware of something, we see it everywhere. Yeah. And so once you tune yourself to a frequency, you will tune into that frequency in the world. And so I'm not suggesting that art is bad. And those of you that are like, it doesn't affect me, there's a lot happening under the surface that you're not taking into account. And I'm not here to demonize all television. That's fine. Watch what you want to watch. Just be aware that it's having an effect on your worldview. And is it a worldview that you really want to keep?
Yes, that's so important. That's a conversation I've had with several people. I said like, hey, like, why are you watching this first thing in the morning? Like, don't, like, I understand if you really like this show or whatever it is, that's totally fine. But just, I would suggest just waiting a little bit. You're even more influenceable with your mind right in the morning and right at night, because you're kind of in that fatigue state and you're shifting into an energetic state. And so I think you just got to be really mindful about those things. And it's also, we can use these things to our advantage. Like one of the easiest ways to change your life or build these positive habits is change your environment. I remember, I think I shared a post last December about, you don't need to change your entire life, your entire routine on January 1st. You can do it slowly. But when I moved here, I actually was able to build kind of a different routine because I moved houses and I moved in with my partner. It was like a whole entire environment where I had so much less going on externally that I could kind of create this new routine with this entirely new environment shift. But if you're in your old environment and you're trying to create this entire life change, one, it's going to be extremely difficult. So you got to do it, slowly. And you quoted Atomic Habits earlier. That's a big part in that book. So definitely highly recommend that people read that book if you haven't already. Or sometimes you do got to change the environment. I think, is it in Atomic Habits where they were talking about the heroin addiction from the war and how like such a high percentage of them had this addiction. When they came back, it was like eliminated by so many of them, like cold turkey. Like they weren't addicted anymore. They just never took it because it wasn't around them, wasn't in the environment. They weren't hanging around the same people versus the addiction recovery rates for, especially for heroin, just in the general public is so vastly different than that scenario. But it's because those people get out of rehab and go right back in with the same friends, with their family. And it's so hard to make change when you're right back into that same situation.
Yeah. And another aspect of that story that I find very powerful, because I'm really into the mind, and I don't want, I'm not underscoring the importance of what we just talked about with environment, but the psychological power of an individual to overcome a drug like heroin, right? Just by putting yourself in a different situation, so people, it would be unheard of for someone to say, so you're saying that I won't want heroin anymore if I just don't hang around heroin users? No, that's not possible. It's a physically addicting drug, but yet it was possible. And so I think it's important to understand that no one gets to tell you what's possible for your mind and what you can do with the power. I mean, just the brain is the biggest computer we have. Like it can outprocess any computer in the world. And people say, well, I don't know about that. I'm like, listen, science is great. And science is definitely catching up with some of the metaphysical and spiritual stuff that I believe. And yet I don't think that there is ever going to be the measure of a human and the potential and capability of what's possible for us. And so I just want to add that while all of those things are great and they're going to encounter, especially in the world of athletics, people are going to tell you what's possible and what's not possible for you. The only person that actually gets to decide that is you.
It's so important. And I love what you said earlier about, if you consider yourself a procrastinator, you're going to have to ditch that identity piece if you want to build something different. And some really good feedback that came into my mind that I got, I think last year when I started even this podcast social media account, I wanted to post like daily positive messages, but different messages about mindset and different things. Yeah. And I got a message from an old snowboard friend, and she said, I love this because all the memes and like quotes that people always share and on their story and with their friends, they're always like satirical, and they're always like, it's a joke about being a procrastinator. It's a joke about, right? And that's like so popular in our culture, but I think that just perpetuates our identity with these negative habits. So I was like, yeah, that's so true. And so whenever I create a lot of content, I'm like, oh, I could like make fun of, these negative thoughts that come into my mind when I'm doing this, or I can make fun of this, and like that would go viral. But I'm like, but that's not the message I want to put out. But I know it's what everyone is consuming. But I'm like, I want to shift that, even if it's not going to get the same amount of views or the same amount of shares. But it is unfortunate that as we share those things with our peers, we just relate that back to our identity more and more. And we make it okay for us to just be, okay, now we're just procrastinators. We're all procrastinators. And there's something to be said about like normalizing some of these things. And of course, but I don't think that moves us forward towards our goals in any way.
Yeah, they say that the leading edge is not crowded. And so like, if you want to be out there and you want to be a leader especially when it comes to positivity, it's not going to be so crowded. There's enough people around the water. There's more people around the water cooler than the guy that's sitting at his desk who's listening to like a positive song or something like that. And, the complainers are always going to outnumber I don't want to say always, that's not true. But in general, and Gary Vee talks about this, make positivity louder. And so we as a society have the power to shift, and the planet is shifting, and it's happening just like anything at a very slow pace that you can't almost see it, but it's happening. And so it's all of our jobs to sort of jump on the scale on the positive side and say, if I talk negative if I do some sort of piece where I'm challenging something like even the Naomi Osaka, I'm going to get way more stuff. I've made an entire month of positive videos called The Daily Rep, 19 views, 5 likes, very small, and I don't have the hugest following on social media. But what I know is your friend is out there and needing that message. And so I'm making that content for that one person that needs it. And I think that that's important as someone who works in the mental performance space. And if you work with athletes in any way, just know that if you are on the positive, yes, there's plenty of people spouting the same messages. But if you're saying anything that comes from an authentic place that is helpful from your own experience, there's someone that needs to hear that message. And it's not necessarily Natalie or my job to say it because it didn't come from us, and we're speaking to our experience. So everybody, has an audience, and we just need to make sure that we're continually cultivating, not just on the, I'm just going to keep making this content, but like, I believe that this is the way to go. And we just need to like enroll more people in that instead of just kind of throwing up the white flag and being like, look, negativity is always going to be louder. No, it's not. One day it won't be, as long as we keep still making our little strides in inches, just like anything in sports. It's not necessarily the overnight success is a myth. You know, it's actually the years and years that you didn't see behind the scenes. And so same thing with positivity. It's making a comeback.
Yes. Well, I appreciate your commitment to putting out positive content. I think it's so important and much needed in this world. And I'll make one relation to anyone listening that hopefully like drives this point home is when I was depressed, I would look up like, you know, depressed memes, and they're funny. Like it's like just talking about like, you know, just different situations are like, oh no, I'm depressed. And it makes just jokes about it. And so it made me feel better for a while, but then it made me just instill just that identity piece that now I am a depressed person. I've been diagnosed with depression. Yes. This is who I am. Versus then when I shifted and started seeing, okay, what's positive? What are these new experiences I can seek out? What are these other things I can do and not follow these depressed meme accounts or these like really deep quotes that were like just making me feel sad all the time. I was like, oh, wow, this is a whole new world. Like my mood changed. Everything was different. Right. And so now I can like see those things in little doses and be like, oh, that is really funny. Send that to my boyfriend. Like it's a joke or whatever, because I'm like out of that for long enough. But I think it is a dangerous point to get into. And it is why, you know, we have a lot of teen depression, a lot of teen mental health, but they start sharing these things back and forth and it becomes more of an identity. And so we latch on, and there's nothing, you know, wrong with that. It's okay not to be okay. And it is normal to want to, you know, feel accepted. But I think it is like a downward spiral when everything we see is all about this diagnosis we've been given or whatever it is, versus if we see some of the opposite, some of the positive things that can help pull us out and see a different side of things so that we can let go of that identity.
It's perhaps controversial to say, but what you're talking about there is like, gosh, so powerful. Like that whole thing about like, hey, I'm diagnosed clinically depressed. I'm diagnosed bipolar. I have anxiety. And I'm not at all demeaning or, you know, putting a mark against the psychologist or psychiatrist and what they do, because but even then, I've been talking to some sports psychologists and they will tell you that labels, these labels are designed to help with treatment, but not necessarily to be wrapped up in identity. Yeah. This was not designed to be something that you wear as something for the rest of your life. And like, hey, I have depression. It's incurable. And so, and maybe that's controversial. And so I'm fine if you don't agree with me, but I do not believe that we have to be depressed for the rest of our lives. Now, I understand if you're on medication, you need to do what you think is best and follow your doctor's advice and follow treatment protocols that you think are best. And I think that even in the midst of like, hey, I've been diagnosed depressed. Okay, cool. Let's follow whatever the protocol. But then also, how are we feeding ourselves in a way that doesn't allow us to lean on that diagnosis or lean on that label so that I don't actually have to do work? And I'm not saying that depressed people are not trying to get out of depression. Yeah. I know they are. I'm just saying that I think there's a point where it's just like, look, there's nothing I can do about it. It's who I am. And I'm like, no, it's something you're experiencing. It's not necessarily who you are. And so that's just something I want to make a distinction about. And I'm happy for you to, send some fire my way if you don't agree. So.
No, I think I know what you're getting at and what you're saying. And I think it is very easy. And like, I have so much empathy because I went through the same thing where I made it part of my identity when I was going through it. For sure. But I think it doesn't help in that recovery process, but it's so easy because that's the thing with depression that people don't understand. And, you can talk about it and I can talk about it in this way. And I know neither of us mean it as a way diminishing people who are depressed. Right. But it's because like, I've been there and I understand that when you are in it, it is so hard to get out of it. And it is so hard to see a different way. It's hard to even see yourself how you were when you were happy. Yeah. See that future that you could be a different person again. That's just the way that like that illness works. And so it is very easy to make it part of your identity and share these memes and do those things. But so it is an uphill battle to release that identity and try to say, okay, this is something I'm going through, but if I can really fight my way out of this, maybe it's not something I always go through. And for example, like I was diagnosed with anxiety, I've been diagnosed with ADHD, and those are things like, sure, maybe that diagnosis follows me for my life, but those are just things like I go through anxious bouts, but I know how to deal with it now. Right. And so I deal with anxiety, but I'm not, I don't go to people and say, hey, I am just anxious all the time, or, I've worked hard to make sure I'm not anxious all the time, or I have ADHD. And for sure, that's something that, when it comes to maybe speaking or my daily focus process, I have to deal with every single day, but I'm not just going to make that my whole identity and change everything and say, well, I can't do any of these things because I have it. Right. So I think there is like that differentiator there. So I appreciate you sharing.
No, and I think, and just to like kind of encap this kind of goes back to the conversation about Naomi and athletes and identity. And we've talked about this at length on so many occasions. And it's just that the idea, and the reason I make the distinction between, like you even said, I am feeling anxious, like I use the word feeling. I am anxious, because I am anxious now I'm putting that on me. I'm anxiety, I am depression. And it's like, and similarly, I am an athlete. I am a winner. I am good. And so if I have a moment that I'm not that, then who am I? And so it's just like sort of separating that and saying, I'm experiencing anxiety. I experience or have bouts with depression. And so changing it to something that is something that you might be taking along on your journey, but it doesn't have to be wrapped up in who you are. And so you're allowed to separate that in a way that is healthy, and giving yourself some distance to say, maybe I can have some power over this versus I'm powerless to do anything about it, if that makes sense.
I think the reason why even just separating from your identity is somewhat controversial is because when we look at people who say, oh, she's an athlete, so she can't be depressed, is because they are putting that identity. They're saying, if you are someone who's depressed, that's all you are.
That's all you are. That's right.
You're just anxious. You can't then go and perform or do this. So it is, I think that's what's going to change some of the stigma, is recognizing it isn't necessarily an identity piece. So I think, that can open a whole can of worms. I'm sure we could talk about it all day.
Yeah.
But there's two questions I always end things on. I want to add in a third. I think I'm going to start adding this in. So I'll start with that one. Is what is one book that you could recommend people to read when it comes to, mindset or mental performance?
Oh man, that's good. Of course, there's so many, right? We've talked about Atomic Habits. We've talked about a lot of stuff, but I shared this today, and I don't think anyone else is going to share it. So I'm going to share this one. And I know that those are listening, you're not going to be able to see, but the book is The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Dr. Joseph Murphy. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, Natalie, but this is not a mental performance book. And so I want athletes to understand that, basically what I put on my post a couple of weeks ago, which is like, your mind is like an untamed or unbroken horse. And so being able to harness and take the power back of your mind is going to do wonders for your, your performance, because the difference between the greatest of all time and the guy that we can't remember his name, or the athlete that we can't remember their name, is just mindset. It's just mentality. It's having that. And even then, the greatest of all time, if they're not 100% in all of us, like this idea that we don't use 100% of our brain, that's not true. We're not aware of the use of 100% of our brain. Our brain is constantly working at 100% capacity, unless you've had some sort of brain injury. But even then, with neuroplasticity, the brain compensates and figures out a way to still work optimally. And so this idea of he's not talking about brain science in this book. He's talking about how to use the power of your subconscious mind to direct your mind in the way of what you want, the outcome and the results. And I think that would speak to mental performance, whether you be an athlete or you be someone in life that's trying to achieve any kind of success. So
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that I asked that question because that's a new one. I think, people are always looking for book recommendations. So I think I'll keep that one in there because everyone who comes on here always has some great books that they're reading. And I know definitely you do. So I'm glad I asked because I haven't read that. So I'm going to have to go into it. So here are the last two that I always ask everybody. And first one is, out of everything that you do daily, all the daily habits you have, what is the one biggest game changer for you?
I would say it would be my self-talk, but my intentional self-talk. So just talking myself through. Basically, I get up every morning, or I was. I'm not as consistent sometimes, but I get up and I script out what I want to happen or what's happening in my life the way that I want it to be happening. So, for example, right now, if you look at my stats, I don't have 10,000 followers, but I will say I'm loving the fact that I have 10,000 followers on my Instagram because I've been able to impact people in countries all over the world. It's making such a difference for me. And I am like every day someone's sending me a message that's saying, thank you so much for your post. They make such a difference, that kind of stuff. So by doing that, I'm planting the seed saying, I'm claiming this. And what I'm seeing is movement and momentum in my life in that direction. Doesn't mean I'm not taking action in other ways. I'm not just sitting and waiting for that to happen, but I'm still posting every day. I'm still doing my thing. But now the universe knows I've claimed it. And so all of a sudden things start to happen that way. And it's almost like, wow, this is awesome. So that's something that I would say.
I love that you brought that up because I actually started a few weeks ago. I put on my reminders, I have 3 and it says, I am grateful that, and it's like things in the future, like I have this, or I have this freedom to do this and whatever. I'm all myself, my whole family, we're all happy, healthy, and can do these opportunities and things together, whatever it is. And it's funny, I was driving and they popped up and my boyfriend's like, what is coming up always on your phone? Like every 4 hours. I'm like, oh, just some reminders for myself. No big deal. And it's so funny, but that's awesome. It does make a big difference and it keeps you aligned with those positive thoughts and the actions that you need to take to even get there. So love that. And the last question is, you're looking back on your whole life, like you're late in your life, late in your days, looking back at everything you have done and accomplished in the world. If you could describe the impact that you wanted to make in one word or that you have made, what would it be?
One word. As the verbose speaker, think. Just impact or legacy. Those are the two things. Like or transformation. I know those are different words, but like maybe this is the word that's coming, revolutionize. I want to revolutionize mental performance or mindset, anything. I want people to be in the place of that they understand that they are the masters of their own destiny and that it's not out of their hands. And so, I just want to revolutionize I want to be a part of that. And so that's a huge, I know I can't do it by myself, but I'm going to keep beating that drum. And I hope people always say like, Bryn always made me think differently and like help me, really take back control of my life and not controlling the things you can't control, but realizing there's a lot more in your control than you realize when you stop listening to everybody else and you start sort of having those inner conversations that start directing you to where you really want to be. So.
That's awesome. Well, I love that. And I've loved this conversation. And I want to make sure people can find those positive messages that you put out every day, as well as being able to work with you if they can do that. So where can people go to find you and to see all that kind of stuff?
Okay. Yes. So the first thing I want to say is that, of course, the best place to find me is on Instagram. I post there every day consistently. I'm also on LinkedIn, of course, but it's all everywhere on anywhere social media is at Bryn Drescher. So it's just my first and last name, really easy. And I know Natalie's going to put that in the show notes, so I'm not even going to bother spelling it out. So secondly, I work with athletes on the mental game and I have an 8-week thing. And it's funny because it's called the All In Podcast and I teach my All In method. It's a 5-step method. And I call the program the Mental Athlete Program, but essentially I take athletes through my 5-step method of helping them harness the best of their mental health to increase their performance and be just a better overall human, for their team, for their life, etc. And, you can just DM me, or I do have a website, but it's being redesigned. So, BrynDrescher.com, but it's kind of more based on when I was a speaker. I still do speak. I love to go out and speak. So you can, of course, contact me there for that. But yeah, so social media, DMs, and then of course you can email me via my website. It's just info@BrynDrescher is my email. So BrynDrescher.com. Sorry, gotta say that part.
Awesome. Yes, I will definitely put your website and your Instagram and that stuff in the show notes. So if anyone wants to go check it out, I highly recommend you do. Help you get there to your intention of the 10,000 or whatever it is.
Well, it's going to happen.
Oh yeah. So I know you're impacting people in a positive way. And I think those things are just a byproduct of that. So appreciate you coming on here. Love this conversation. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Natalie. So such a great conversation.